I just want to talk about Gnosis. It's a concept and term coined by the Gnostics during probably the 1st or 2nd century, after Christ, is a sector of Christian mysticism, Gnosticism. Not to be confused with agnostics, but Gnostics. And Gnosis, I've talked about it a few times on this channel, is about self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is extremely important in self-actualization and growing and becoming a greater person, and becoming more. You can't do that unless you have self-knowledge. It's like that Latin term, tenet gnosc, which is a Latin term for know thyself. Gnosis is knowledge of your true self, not your fleshy self, your earth self, your desires that are linked to your lower nature. Gnosis is about your spiritual self, which is your real self. Gnostics believe that this world that we live in, this reality, is the dream. We're in a dream. We're in a simulation. We're in a creation by another being, but it's not the true reality. It's not the transcendent reality that we all come from. That's the source. That's the true reality. You could call it heaven. You could call it another dimension. It's beyond our 5 senses that we can't necessarily perceive here in this waking life. But Gnosis connects us to our true essence, our true self, through self-knowledge. And you only gain that through reflection and experience. But recently, I've been coming to terms with another concept that Gnostics have preached, which is that sin is man-made. All sin is man-made, and the greatest sin is ignorance. When you lack ignorance of your true self, you don't have Gnosis. You're ignorant. And that is a sin, because you don't know who you are, who you really are. You're identifying with impermanent things that are happening inside your body and your flesh, your desires, your traumas, your experiences. Not to say these things aren't important, but when you identify with them and that becomes your perception of who you are, your identity is shaped by those things, then you become very rigid. And this is what happens to people as they get older. That's why you see a lot of older people are very rigid and not open-minded, because they become that way. But back to my point, recently I've discovered a sort of ignorance within myself through some depressive cycles that I've been going through. I realized that self-hatred is ignorance. When you hate yourself, even if it's, when you hate who you are or what you do, I think often it comes from a place of wanting to be better, knowing that you are more than that. And so that your potential to be a greater person is there. And so that self-hatred arises. But sometimes when we spiral in depressive episodes, we get really down on ourselves and we lose sight of who we are, who we really are. And that's what ignorance is. And it is a sin. Because when you hate who you really are, how God designed you to be at your core, when you hate that part of yourself, if you've reached that, not everyone deals with depression, so obviously this doesn't apply to everybody, but people that have, like me, have struggled with self-hatred for a long time, and this is a sin. You're hating yourself. You're ignorant of how much God loves you. And if God loves you and created you the way you are, then shouldn't you love yourself? Now you could say that that's just a way to cope, but I would disagree. If you understand that we do come from an intelligent creator, and that this isn't all just coincidence, if you understand that, you were intentionally created to be the way you are, and that the only real sin is your lack of self-awareness of who you really are. And when you hate yourself, you hate God's creation. It's kind of leaves a bad taste in the creator's mouth, I would imagine. For instance, when you create a piece of art and somebody judges it and critiques it in a way that's super negative, often that hurts, right? And we could take feedback and we could try to improve ourselves if it's constructive criticism, but most times, that's not the case. People are projecting, and You absorb and internalize that negativity from other people. Your consciousness is more revolving and orbiting around what other people think about you and not what God thinks about you. And so that's a form of ignorance. It's a form of sin. So I just wanted to make this quick video just to remind you that you can love yourself and you can accept yourself for who you are. You know, I've dealt with, I can't really call it manic depression. I've never been diagnosed. And I have no interest in it because I look at all mental illness as impermanent and that I could change and I can heal. But I've just been going through a rough few years. A lot of things have happened to me and not favorable things at all, you know. So it has definitely impacted me and my mental health and well-being, and I would even say my spiritual wellness, you know. But yeah, I realized that the other day, you know, if God loves me, I should really love myself. Now, you could get into the semantics of what your true self is versus, you know, your lower human nature. I think that all of us possess 3 core traits that are everlasting that we could attribute to ourself, and that is the masculine aspects of ourself, our feminine aspects of ourself, and the spirit aspect of ourself, the soul. I think that in order to be created, I mean, we could go back to basic stuff here, biology. You need a man and a woman, right? You need a masculine and feminine. But a lot of people get caught up in being hyper masculine or being hyper feminine and trying to play these roles that society has perpetuated for thousands of years. And some of those gender roles are biological, and yeah, men can do things women can't, women can do things men can't. No one's arguing that, no one's sensible, at least. But have you ever noticed that some people in today's culture that are super insecure and lack self-knowledge are playing in these roles as hyper masculine or hyper feminine versions of themselves? You know, it's like to fit in or to feel confident about who they are. Like if you're a woman, a lot of women think that in order to keep a good man, they got to be hyper feminine and show no sense of masculinity. And this is not true. You don't want a woman that is playing that because she's not being honest with herself. And the same could be said about a man. A lot of men play this hyper masculine role. You know, you have people like Andrew Tate and all these dipshits online that, you know, have that macho bravado. There's nothing wrong with feeling like a badass. As a man, I think it is important that you feel like a badass to some extent. But I don't think, if you're denying your own femininity as a man, you're going to be a really bad partner, a really bad friend. You're going to be a really bad family member. You're going to be a really bad business person to deal with, because you're just going to be a bad person to deal with in relation in any way. You know, and I would say the same with women that try to act hyper feminine, because everybody on this earth, male and female, has masculine and feminine qualities. And then they have their self, their real soul. And that soul that we possess, you know, scientists for a long time have tried to find the soul. They can't find it because it transcends this reality. Because like I said earlier, this reality is a dream. The masculine and feminine are just the positive and negatives that are needed to create life in the physical realm that we live in. But this is all just a dream. This is not who we really are. Our concept of self is derived from various things, but oftentimes that's just our ego. That's not who we really are. That's not our transcendent self, who we truly are beyond this illusion. So when you gain gnosis, really, it's not something you gain, it's something you discover. When you discover gnosis, when you discover self-knowledge, you realize that you have masculine and feminine qualities. You realize your true self, and you realize that in order to do good in this world, you have to love yourself as God created you. There's discernment that you need here. You need to learn that, well, you need to do some soul searching and find out who you really are, because if your concept of self and identity is derived from the ego, then you're going to delude yourself for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. A lot of adults are just old children, like they've never really matured. They've never really gained wisdom. And you can see it, self-evident. And then there's some young people that are wiser than the oldest people I know. They're rare, but what I'm trying to say is that you have to have discernment to kind of cut through the illusions of who you think you are, your identity based on your conditioning, the environment you grew up in, you know, the habits that you have, the behaviors, the attachments, the addictions. These things are what we often derive our sense of self from, or the people we're around, but that's not who you really are. And so when you really find out who you really are, love that part of you, man, because that part of you is going to take you out of your own hell. It's going to liberate you from your suffering. And it's going to allow you to have the drive to endure the suffering that you will experience inevitably, because we're here and this realm is about suffering. This earthly plane is about coming here to suffer and learn and finding out who we really are. That's the meaning of life from my point of view. And many other people share that point of view. When I say you're going to liberate yourself from suffering, I guess the better way to put it is that you're going to be able to handle the suffering and not be broken by it. But self-hatred, it doesn't serve you or anybody. And when you're sitting there in your room or wherever you're at and you're beating yourself up over silly shit, just know you're damaging yourself. Your mental health, your body, your brain begins, and your mind begins to degrade. Your body, it all listens to that, those beliefs, those ideas you have about yourself. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy after a while. So you have to realize and see beyond your own mistakes and your own faults and your own weaknesses, because we all have them, and still be able to love yourself. I think it's a very important thing right now. There's a lot of things going on in the world. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of heaviness, right? You know, you look at the news every day, it's always some bullshit here and there and everywhere. Things to addict you on at every step of the way. The people that exploit our addictions have mastered, they have mastered making addictive things available to everyone. And look, it's on your phone, it's right there. You don't even have to walk down the street anymore. You don't have to go to the store. So, my advice to the people that maybe feel like they don't know themselves that well and they're in a cycle of depressive episodes. Since I've walked through the fire, I understand. And I've been drowned by the misery too. But I've pulled myself out of it many times. And I'm telling you right now, you need to do some soul searching and find out who you really are, because that's going to help you transcend the suffering, your true self. Find out who you really are. And I can tell you right now, it has nothing to do with social media. It has nothing to do with technology. It has nothing to do with your environment, because it transcends all that. Not only are you hurting your mind and your body by hating yourself and it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then mental illness and physical illness begins to manifest within you through that self-hatred and that depressiveness, you also hurt others because you're not at your best. And so you can't be of service to anybody if you can't service yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't really show up as your best self to really give people the light they need from you when you're in a state of self-hatred. But it does start with you. It starts with you're hurting yourself. And it's a form of ignorance. And that is a sin. I have many other ideas revolving around this topic, but I think those are for some other videos, so I'll just cut it short here. I know it's been a while since I've made a video on this channel. I've been going through some stuff personally. And everybody's going through stuff, you know, I'm not special there. Not that the suffering I deal with isn't valid, but I'm trying to figure it out, you know. I'm very committed to figuring it out, even though it's been difficult. For me, personally, I guess I'll open up a little bit here. I've had these limiting beliefs, and the self-hatred that I was partaking in had a lot to do with doubt. And you have to understand that the seeds of doubt grow bitter fruit. When you doubt yourself, it withers you. it siphons your vitality. And that is something I've really struggled with for so many years. And with this YouTube channel especially, I've wanted to make a lot of videos. I've written so many different videos, dude. And I just didn't show up because I doubted myself. Maybe I was worried about what you thought. There's so many videos I haven't posted. And I just get frustrated with myself. For a while, it had to do with technology. I didn't have the right mic or camera. And I didn't possess the consciousness to be able to come here and talk to you guys and be able to spit it, spit the truth. But I realized that a part of my calling is to speak uncomfortable truths, because there's a lot of transformation that needs to happen in my life and other people's lives too. And people that come, if you come to my channel, odds are you're probably one of those people that are in great need of transformation. I'm not saying I can transform you, but by listening to me, it may plant seeds within you so that you can transform yourself. And I do believe that you have the ability to do that. With that being said, keep your head up, and I'll catch you in another video.